Do you believe in the things you can't explain? What if I told you that the most terrifying experiences are often the ones closest to us, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone to uncover them? Welcome back to True Fear Files, where the truth is often more terrifying than fiction. Tonight, we're about to take you into the unknown with 3 real-life encounters that defy logic, make your skin crawl, and will leave you questioning reality itself. These aren't just stories, they're true encounters, moments that still haunt the people who lived through them. And trust me, once you hear these, you'll never look at the world around you the same way again. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on another terrifying tale. I promise you, these stories will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Now sit back, get comfortable, because things are about to get truly terrifying. Our first story comes from Emily, who was just 16 when the unexplainable began. She lived in a quiet, suburban home with her family. It was the kind of place that seemed safe, ordinary. The type of home where you expect to grow up without ever questioning the world around you. But there was something about this house, something hidden in the shadows. At first, it was subtle, just strange noises in the dead of night, soft footsteps like someone walking around the house when no one should have been there, a faint, raspy sound of breathing, too close for comfort. Emily tried to ignore it, assuming it was just her imagination. But soon it became undeniable. One stormy night, everything changed. Emily woke with a sudden chill crawling over her skin. The room felt colder than usual, and the dim glow of the hallway light flickered on and off. She lay there for a moment, wondering if it was just the storm, but then she heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hall toward her room. She peeked out of her bedroom door, trying to see through the darkness. That's when she saw it, a shadow. But it wasn't like any shadow she had ever seen. This one was wrong. It was taller, twisted, its edges blurred, like it was trying to hide from the light. Frozen in place, Emily's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to call out, but her voice refused to come. The shadow moved, slowly, purposefully, down the hallway. It wasn't just a trick of the light, it was something real, something alive. When it reached her door, it stopped. For a moment it turned toward her room, and in the darkness she could feel its presence, like eyes burning into her soul. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The next morning, Emily tried to explain what had happened, but her family dismissed it. They thought it was just a nightmare, the kind of thing you see when you're half awake in the middle of a storm. But for Emily, the fear lingered, and what she'd seen, it was far from over. For weeks after that night, the footsteps continued. Each time they grew closer, closer to her room, until one fateful night, when Emily was heading to the bathroom, she saw it again. But this time, it was standing outside her door. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. This time, it had form. Dark, hollow eyes stared at her from the darkness. Its grin twisted unnaturally wide, like it was savoring her terror. Emily could feel the air growing thicker, suffocating. The very walls seemed to close in around her. Without thinking, Emily bolted out of the house. She ran into the night, not stopping until she was miles away. Her family, terrified, packed up and moved out of that house. But the story didn't end there. The strange thing? The next tenants who moved in reported seeing the same shadow, the same presence. It was as if something or someone was trapped in that house, waiting, watching, waiting for the next soul to walk through the door. And now that house stands empty again, abandoned by those who couldn't escape the darkness that lurks within its walls. But the question remains, what is it that haunts this place? And will it ever let go? Our second story takes us to a remote stretch of forest, a place where Chris thought he could clear his mind, escape the chaos of everyday life. The sun was high in the sky, the birds were chirping, and the trail ahead of him seemed like the perfect way to unwind. Little did Chris know this hike would soon turn into a nightmare he couldn't escape. It was a beautiful day, the kind that beckoned you outdoors. The trail was well marked, a simple route that promised nothing more than a peaceful stroll. Chris had been hiking for hours, lost in his thoughts when he first felt it, a subtle, creeping sense of unease. Something wasn't right. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. He kept looking over his shoulder, convinced he was being watched, but every time the forest was empty. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the stillness, and yet the unsettling feeling clung to him like a shadow. It wasn't until he reached a clearing that the real terror began. In the middle of the clearing, at the edge of the sunlight, stood a figure. At first, Chris thought it was another hiker, maybe someone resting in the shade. But something about it was wrong. The figure was unnaturally tall, too still, like it had been standing there for hours or longer. As Chris approached, the figure didn't move. It didn't acknowledge his presence. It just stood there, staring at him. Chris felt his heart skip a beat. There was something about the way it looked at him. Empty, hollow eyes, like it wasn't really there. Like it was just watching. Then, without a word, the figure turned, slowly, deliberately, and disappeared into the woods. No footsteps, no sound at all, just the strange, unnatural stillness that followed it. Chris stood there for a moment, his body frozen, trying to process what he'd just seen. His mind raced, but his body reacted before he could think. He decided to leave. He turned around, heading back toward the trail, his pulse pounding in his ears. But just as he started walking, the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping behind him stopped him cold. He spun around, his heart in his throat, expecting to see another hiker, someone else on the trail. But there was nothing. The forest was as silent as it had been when he first entered. He shook it off, telling himself it was just the wind, the forest playing tricks on him. But then it happened again. Another snap. Another footstep. This time, closer. Chris's breath caught in his chest as the footsteps quickened, following him. His feet started to move faster, almost instinctively, as the sound of something or someone lurking in the woods behind him grew louder and closer. He ran, his mind racing with fear, but the footsteps were right behind him, growing faster until they were almost beside him. When Chris finally burst through the trees and into the parking lot, gasping for breath, he looked around, but there was no one there. The terror didn't end there. Later, when Chris spoke to other hikers, he learned that this wasn't an isolated experience. People had been disappearing in that forest for years, vanishing without a trace. Some said they were lost, others said they were taken by something that stalks the woods, something that hunts in the shadows. Chris never went back. He couldn't. And as for the woods, well, the mystery remains. What lurks out there waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path? Some say it's a shadow, a presence that can never be seen but is always there. Watching. Waiting. Our final story takes us to a small, seemingly ordinary apartment in the heart of the city. Sarah and her roommate were looking for a fresh start, eager to leave behind the chaos of their lives and settle into something new, something that felt like home. But what they didn't know was that their apartment had a dark past, one that would soon make their peaceful life anything but. The building was old, one of those places that had seen better days. The walls creaked, the floors groaned with every step. But it was cheap, and most of the residents were friendly. Everything seemed fine at first, too fine perhaps. Something wasn't right, and Sarah felt it the moment she stepped inside. At first, the oddities were small, so small they could easily be dismissed. Sarah would come home to find her keys moved from their usual spot. The picture frame she had just straightened the night before would be crooked again. Little things. Things that felt just off enough to make her question her own mind. But then it escalated. One night, Sarah was awoken by a loud, persistent knocking sound. It was coming from the living room. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, almost impatient. Sarah got up, her heart racing. She walked into the living room expecting to find a window left open, the wind playing tricks on her. But the room was empty. Nothing had changed. The knocking stopped as soon as she entered. She tried to dismiss it as nerves, but that night she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe the wind, she thought. Maybe I'm just tired. But deep down she knew. This wasn't normal. A few nights later the knocking returned, but this time it was worse. The sound was more insistent, almost frantic, as if whatever was making it wanted to get her attention. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from deeper within the apartment, closer, like it was following her. This time, Sarah couldn't ignore it. She had to know what was happening. When she stepped into the living room, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, in the corner of the room, was a shadowy figure, tall, featureless, but there, watching. The figure was unnaturally still, like it was waiting for her. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as its dark, hollow eyes seemed to stare right through her, its presence cold and suffocating. She blinked, her mind racing, and when she opened her eyes again, the figure was gone. Terrified, Sarah grabbed her things and ran. She couldn't stay there any longer. The fear that gripped her was too real, too visceral. She moved out, telling herself it was just her imagination. But the thing is, it wasn't. When the new tenants moved in, they experienced the same thing, the knocking, the cold spots, and the figure. The same tall, dark presence that haunted Sarah lingered in the apartment, waiting for its next victim. No one knew who or what haunted that apartment. But one thing was certain. Whatever it was never going to let go. And as long as that apartment stood, the darkness inside would continue to claim the souls brave enough or foolish enough to move in. Well, there you have it. 3 true bone-chilling encounters that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the places you visit and the sounds you hear in the dark. Each of these stories serves as a warning. Not all things can be explained, and sometimes the things we can't see are the most dangerous. Which one of these stories gave you the creeps? Was it the shadow in the hallway, the figure in the woods, or the haunting presence in the apartment? Or maybe you've experienced something even more terrifying yourself. Don't be afraid to share it with us in the comments below. We're all in this together, and your story might just be the one that keeps someone else up at night. If you've ever had an encounter that you can't explain, or if there's a terrifying tale from your own life that still haunts you, we want to hear it. Your story might be the next one that sends chills down the spine of someone else watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on another terrifying tale. Each week, we bring you more true stories that will make you question everything. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware. And remember, some stories are best left untold, but once they're told, they never really leave.